All right, let's open this. Welcome, everyone. Sorry we're late to the March 16 meeting of the Harbor and Coastal Zone Management Commission. We are streaming on our YouTube channel on LMC TV and on our Zoom link. And we have just received word that at least through April 15th, we will stay on Zoom. So we will expect to be proceeding that way next month as well. Our agenda has one administrative item, though. There are a few things that have popped up too late to make the agenda, so I'll deal with those as new business. We have an update on the Boston Post Road Bridge, and mostly for the folks at home who are following along. And if you are, thank you for paying attention to Village Affairs. The procedure when the state is the applicant is that we don't vote on consistency. Rather, the state contacts us and the Department of State applies our consistency and makes the determination for us. We had an open dialogue with them, first with me and Andrew Maggio, and then with me and Randy Sellier. Went through the process of explaining to the Department of State that there were issues that we would find in determining consistency with the Boston Post Road Bridge as specified. They were fairly narrow issues, and they heard us out. One is that the path under the bridge is slightly smaller. However, and would accordingly restrict water flow slightly in a flood event. However, because the drop in the height of the river at the various bridges is so large, we were talking about only a matter of, they measure it in decimal parts of feet, but really inches. They're really 1 to 2 inches only between the Tompkins Bridge and the Boston Post Road Bridge, and nothing above that. So we narrowed that down in communication to this with the state to the number of residences that might be affected. And it turns out there's really literally 2 properties that could be at all affected. And even then, only theoretically and only by an inch or 2. So we were going to try to see if there was something they could do about that to remove even that effect. The other issue we had is that they proposed to put some fill in the area next to the bridge abutment. And we have a long-standing practice now of not permitting net fill in floodplains. And we explained to them what our rule was and why we do it that way. And it would have necessitated them changing the way they structure the building, but that might have come with some increased cost. The state looked at how we do things, and they determined, for a bunch of administrative reasons, there's a history here where the state had already passed on it and then communicated to us only when it was time to make a fairly minor alteration. And then they were concerned that they couldn't not pass on the alteration, or that they could only speak to the alteration and not to the plan as a whole. That was really the state's failure of communication with us. That's not our fault. But it is what it is. The state got back to us after our last meeting and said that they are going to approve the plan as originally put forth. For purposes of flooding, that probably doesn't matter for the reasons I said. For purposes of our practice of interpreting Rule 11, the floodplain safety rule, not to cite people and property in harm's way, such that we don't permit net fill in a floodplain. That's not a precedent of ours, and therefore, while it's not the way we would do things, that's on the state, and we don't have to live with that precedent. So in that sense, it probably doesn't harm our interests at all. So they're going to go forward with the plan as it was originally established, and they're going to go ahead and get their work done. And I'm sure we will all be glad to see the Boston Post Road Bridge complete. There is a lesson here in clear communication with the state. we have to get on them as early as possible about what our concerns are, because the more time goes by, the less likely they are to change anything because of how we interpret our policies. With that in mind, something came in that is brand new after the deadline for written submissions for this. We got an application for this from the state for harbor work, and they would like comments on it in 30 days. That will come up before the letter is dated the 10th of March. So that will come up before we have an opportunity to have a regularly scheduled meeting again. Because if we don't comment, I think we're going to have problems getting them to pay attention. And I'm not sure we can ask for an extension to that. I think we need to deal with this in the time frame that they've given us, which means I'm going to ask you folks if we can check our calendars and see if we could do a special meeting on the 30th of this month. That would be a Wednesday. That would allow us to get a work group together, formulate comments, distribute them, and vote on them. I've checked my calendar and I can do that date.
Do you want this, the meeting to happen before the 30th or on the 30th?
On the 30th, and then I'll need a volunteer to work group it with me. So we've got a letter together. I don't mind doing a bunch of the drafting, but I think I'm usually better when somebody, looks at it with me and tells me which my ideas are a little too far out over my skis.
I'm available on the 30th.
Me too.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
am I.
That's great. So Brittany, if we can
If you
set
don't
a
mind,
special.
What do they want to do? You're making me a little nervous because it's one thing to do a bridge. It's another thing to play in the harbor.
There's an application, and I don't think I fully understand it. I'll make sure that it's distributed to all the board members and we'll take a look at it. If we have issues with it, we'll tell the state why we have issues with it. Hopefully we'll be able to get them to change it if it's a problem. I'm not asserting that it's a problem. I don't know that it is. But it came in late and sort of off time. Jack, does that mean you want to be my my work group helper for this?
Sure.
Okay, I will send you their application. We'll take a look at it. We'll see if there's anything that raises issues for us. All right, so that's checked off the list. We have
Is that, Tom, is that going to be 7:30 on the 30th?
same bat time, same bat station. And I anticipate, hopefully, the only thing that we'll have to, well, there may be one other thing we need to deal with that night. We voted our recommended wetlands law many months ago. It has come up before the Board of Trustees, who took a look at it 2 weeks ago in a work session and referred it both to other boards and council, and not our council, but not land use council, but village council for comments. It did not come up, though it was on the agenda at Monday night's meeting. However, I know that there's a set of comments from village council. They're drafting comments. They're insightful. Most of them, I think, can be answered. I think I probably want someone to workshop that with too, and to hopefully get ahead of that process and speed it along as quickly. Randy, since I know you have the most history here, I'm going to ask if you'll look at that with me.
Sure.
Thank you. So I will get the comments from Spalzino to Randy. We'll look at those and hopefully we'll have a proposal for the night of the 30th that we can hand back to the Board of Trustees to address those comments as quickly as possible. Well, hopefully we'll get the wetlands law done and it fills some holes, and also I think usefully streamlines procedure, because it makes us the first stop instead of the second stop for all wetlands related issues. It's sometimes planning gets those, and the only issue is really what we say about consistency, and therefore a lot of those applications could be one board touches and not two board touches. We have a contact to reach out to for training, because it's time to get some consistency training. It's been a long time since we did it. We don't have a date for that.
You mean
yet,
for those of us who have no idea what they're talking about? No, I don't want any training.
It's this is a bit of an arcane process, and it will help to sort of go through a train. I know I think Brittany distributed materials, but it's sometimes a little different to hear somebody go through it with us. So we're gonna work to get that set up. That I don't think can be 2 weeks. We'll probably set that for the regular April meeting. And then we have an outstanding applicant item. We are working through some stuff on 921 Soundview, which we last heard at our February meeting. Chris, where do we stand?
We haven't seen anything come in since the last meeting. I did reach out to the applicants' representatives and informed them that they should be looking at not only what was discussed at the meeting, but also to put together additional information on the construction of the pool, the structural construction of the pool for assessment by this board, and requested that they also compile some information and do an assessment of the potential impacts associated with a release of the entire volume of water in the pool if the pool structure was to fail. And I've gotten confirmation from Jacqueline that they are working on that.
That is useful. I think the commission's comments were pretty clear that we have to at least, think about the possibility that whatever's in the pool ends up in Otter Creek. We're gonna have to deal with that, with that eventuality. So we also, I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the other piece of the conversation at the last meeting was scheduling a site visit. You don't typically go on those unless asked. I don't know who would be best to make those arrangements with the applicant team and how to orchestrate that with the board members, but that's out there.
Yeah, historically staff has done that. Brittany, that might be your first time setting up a site visit.
Yeah, I did it with zoning, but they reached out to them directly so they could organize who could make what day. So if everyone could just maybe give me an idea, and I'll reach out to the applicant, let them know these are a couple days as options that a few people can make it.
Okay, so let's try to deal with this by email. All right, let's all send the applicant, I expect, will be fairly open to whatever, because we're not really going to ask them to explain much on it. I mostly want to look at a lot. See what their availability is, and then we'll
Okay, I'll reach out to them first and then get their days, and then I'll just send it out to everybody, you guys, and then we'll figure out.
go take a look at it, see what we think. Okay, those are all the items I had. We've got 2 work group matters to deal with in small groups. And I think that's the agenda. Does anyone have anything else?
So just a comment for Jack and maybe Cami. If you go on the village website and go under boards and scroll down to the Harbor and Coastal Zone Management Commission, then on the left-hand side, there's a lot of stuff, including
The last
the New York
consistency
State
training.
Consistency Manual.
Yep.
And so you can, I will confess to you that I did go through it. It's a little dense, and there was I think someone, Doreen, sent around to me, there was a video of an actual training session. I don't know if that is something, when you say if contemplate having that done again, or
That, yeah, that's what we're gonna have done again, but I thought Brittany had circulated to the new members the link to the.
I may have only
consistency.
sent it to you, Tom, asking if that was good enough to send around. Sorry. I
Oh,
think I only
okay.
sent it to you.
It was, okay, well, that will go around. Yes, there's both a manual and a video of a consistency training. It's
Yeah, that would be very helpful.
you get more out of it in person, so we're going to set up
Yeah.
a new one, but in the meantime, the old one is a good education. So I thought that had gone out, but that will go out, and you can review that, and it'll sort of help you settle into the role.
That's great. Thank you.
And Tom, if you could send me whatever documents you want me to post in relation to what will be on the special meeting for the 30th.
Yep. And and that's, some of those are going to come in late, because some of those will be a working group's recommendation, both a letter to the state on their proposed harbor work, and drafting comments to or responses to the comments of village council.
Yeah, I
for
can
the
post them as I
wetlands law.
receive them.
Okay. All right, I think that's our agenda. Does anyone have anything else? All right, thank you for getting on. I know it wasn't easy or convenient for everybody. this
Tammy,
evening.
feel better.
Oh, thank you.
Tammy, I
guys.
can tell you, you need a cup of tea with honey.
I know,
Chicken
I
soup
need
or
some.
whatever works. Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Aye.
All in favor? Yeah. Thank you, folks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night. Feel better.
Bye. Thank you.